Welcome to another meeting of the Leadership Lessons series brought to you by the Schulich Executive Education Center, or SEEC. My name is Matthias Kipping. I'm a professor and the Richard E. Wall Chair in Business History at Schulich. We are very, very pleased and fortunate to have Mina Mawani as today's guest. Mina is President and CEO of Crohn's and Colitis Canada, a largely volunteer-based, not-for-profit organization. While her recent leadership roles have been in the social sector, including at Civic Action, the Aga Khan Council for Canada, and the Canadian Women's Foundation, she started her career in the private sector at KPMG and Price Waterhouse, and then in the public sector in Ontario's Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. She also sits on numerous boards, and her leadership has been recognized multiple times. Most recently in 2019 with a CIBC Trailblazer and Trendsetter Award among Canada's top 100 most powerful women. And what I just found out is that she is going to teach a course on social sector leadership at Schulich from January. But before we get to her views on leadership and the future of leadership, let's start with Crohn's and colitis. Mina, these are largely hidden diseases, though with a considerable impact on people's lives. I myself only became kind of aware of the severity of these diseases when Japanese Prime Minister Abe resigned because of one of the diseases. Tell us a bit more about them and what Crohn's and Colitis Canada does to help.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me on this panel with you, Matthias. Crohn's and Colitis Canada is a patient organization, national patient organization that serves the needs of 270,000 people living with Crohn's or colitis, which are inflammatory bowel diseases. And they actually are severe diseases that inflame the gastrointestinal tract and really makes you have abdominal cramping, fatigue, weight loss, severe and bloody diarrhea, and can cause a lot of malnutrition. So we serve 270,000 Canadians living with this disease, but in 10 years, we know that this number will grow to 400,000. So as much as you've just become aware of them, as you start talking about this with your family and friends, you will see that this exists in your social circle. That's what we've been hearing a lot about.
Wow, that's a big number. I mean, and again, like I said, I don't, maybe some of our audience is more aware of it, but I was definitely not, and the number going up to 400,000, that's significant. How has the pandemic affected your community, in multiple ways? I mean, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, as you said, as you started off earlier, Matthias, you talked about these being invisible diseases, hidden diseases. People don't like to talk about them, and they're hidden diseases because people find them embarrassing to talk about. They're bowel diseases. And so what happens is we know already that many of these sufferers are, in isolation. They feel isolated. They don't leave their house. And now with the pandemic, it's even gotten worse. And so there's a lot of mental health issues, anxiety. You can imagine what COVID has done to, you and I and people that are living in these conditions. But now with IBD added on, you can just imagine the anxiety that's happening there. One of the things that Crohn's and Colitis did right at the start of the pandemic is we developed a task force that had IBD experts, infectious diseases experts, mental health experts, nutrition and diet experts, brought them all together, and quickly within a week of being announced that we had to close down and shut down in Ontario and Canada, we actually started having patient webinars every Thursday night for our patient population to help them understand the impact of COVID on them and their disease and how they can cope with this over the next few months. And again, tonight we're having a webinar at 7 o'clock that's on vaccines, the whole gamut of vaccines, but what happens when you're living with IBD and how do you go ahead and get the vaccine or not? Really great experts that will be talking tonight.
Great. I think that's very important for your community. What about access to hospitals? Has that been an issue? I think there's no cure as of today for Crohn's or colitis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think our patient community has suffered the same as other patient communities in that access to hospitals has become very sparse, and that, the hospitals are now looking at, they've tightened up the number of patients in their hospitals. Surgeries have, slowed down a bit. So a number of our patients who need surgeries, who need to see an IBD specialist, they used to wait 6 months to a year. And now we're seeing it even, the surgeries, elective surgeries are being stopped. Only emergency surgeries are being done. So yes, absolutely, it's impacting our group, but I think it's impacting the general population as well.
Talk a bit about how it's impacting your charity, how it's impacting your organization, and not-for-profits and health more generally, because you rely extensively on volunteer work, and you rely extensively on donations from the public to be able to do your work and to help people. What's the impact that the pandemic is having there?
Yeah, I think, we've heard a lot about how COVID has impacted the economy. And of course, the health charity sector and our organization has been impacted significantly. We know that we had to close down face-to-face events. Many of us not-for-profit organization rely on the generous donations of our donors and people that come to our events and participate. Now that we don't have these face-to-face events and relying on Zoom, and everybody's on Zoom now, trying to raise dollars through Zoom has been very, very difficult for not-for-profits. We've seen a loss of between 40 to 80, 90% of revenues. Our organization has seen a significant revenue loss, and although our supporters are so generous, but if people that have IBD are losing jobs and they're worried about putting food on their table, it's very hard for them to take out money and give to philanthropy. So we understand it, and we hope that the economy will recover, and we really hope that the government will step in and support the charitable organizations, as a number of charities are closing their doors.
So you're saying the government is a bit called on here to help?
Yeah, there's a number, so many organizations have called on the government to help. And I think that, they're hardworking, they're all working, they're at capacity, they're human beings. And I think they're just trying to manage the flow of, requests coming in. But at some point, they need to understand the millions of patients that are served by our charities. And of course, one of the things that I'm not talking about is the research that we support. We have funded $130 million in research. And if the researchers are not funded, they will close down. We will lose our talent. Universities will lose incredible talent that will move to other countries in the world where they're being supported. So we're really looking to the government to help us support us with our research mandate, as well as, serving our patient populations living with inflammatory bowel disease.
Before I move on, I would encourage those in the audience to, put questions on the Q&A so I can feed them into our conversation. If you have any question, just type it in, and we'll try to answer it during this conversation. Let me move on to two other groups that have been impacted disproportionately by the pandemic, and two groups that you actually deeply care about and have been, involved in promoting, and that's women and immigrants. Actually, I read this morning in The Economist that 39% globally, I don't know where they got that statistic, of jobs are held by women. But among those who lost a job because of the pandemic, it's 54% women. So this is a big gap. So, and you have, as I said, been long a champion for gender equality and for women in leadership. And I looked up your website, and your executive team at Crohn's and Colitis is all female, very impressive. But what do you see as the major impact of the pandemic on women in Canada, worldwide?
Yeah, so, one of the things is that women, we've talked a lot about gender parity. We know that a lot of women take jobs that are probably lower paying jobs. The not-for-profit sector is full of women who are paid at a lower rate than women that are paid in the private sector, the public sector. And, one of the things that I look at is women tend to have child-caring responsibilities. We know that with the whole issue of school system and what's happening, women are severely impacted by COVID right now. They have children who are at home. They're trying to manage a full-time job. A lot of women or immigrants who have jobs where they aren't actually in office work, they actually have to leave their homes and go to a job. How can they leave their children at home? Whether, they're 7 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, you're leaving kids at home alone because you have to go to your job and put food on the table. We really need to think about, what are we going to do to support women? If children don't go to school and they have to stay home. A lot of my friends have talked about how, even if it's online learning, if it's 2 hours, well, that's great. There's 2 hours of online learning, but then what do you do with those kids at home? You have to support them. You have to teach the curriculum. And quite frankly, you are also holding down a full-time job. So if you have an office job and you're working from home, you may be able to manage that, with mental health issues, because that's going to drive you mad. But if you have to leave the house, what are you going to do? So a number of women have given up their jobs. They've left the job sector to be at home to look after their kids. So we really need to think about how we're going to help women, and especially women who are single mothers and having to look after putting food on the table, supporting their children, having a job. There are a lot of questions and a lot of answers that need to happen right now.
So how do we find those answers? Who's going to step up again? I mean, what's going to have to happen? This is a big issue. I can see this, and I think most people will see this. But what can we do?
Well, again, we can't put everything on the shoulders of the government. We actually have to take a look at private sector, government. But again, I'm doing this with you, Matthias, a university. I think universities have incredible talent and knowledge and wisdom. And there has to be some guidance in the government as to what's happening in this sector. How can we support our women? One of the biggest things that we can do is think about flexibility. One is flexibility, allowing women to be flexible if they're working from home. If they're not working from home, how do we allow flexibility? We've seen the Ontario government come in and increase pay for PSWs. A majority of PSWs are women. So supporting them with the living wage. Thinking about, how can we help women to, even in terms of childcare, what are we doing for childcare that allow women to continue working? So I think a number of people are going to have to come together here. It's a not-for-profit sector, the private sector, the public sector, and the education sector has to step in as well.
Okay, and what about, again, women in leadership roles? As I said, your executive team's all women. You've been a leader in many, many organizations throughout your career. Looking back and looking forward, do you see any progress? Can more progress be made in that respect? What's been your experience? I mean, you had to, I'm sure it wasn't easy for you to do all the jobs you've been doing.
Right. I think that gender parity and now the discussion, more along the immigrant women and immigrants, we need to have a serious conversation. And I think that we have actually been looking at women in leadership positions, but there still are very few. And that's even in the not-for-profit sector. I think that there's some misunderstanding that the not-for-profit sector has a lot of women in leadership positions, or, I think it has to be something that is you mandate it. And for me, it's been very important to take a look at our leadership to make sure that women are given, opportunities. We have to actually sit down at our tables, and it's not just a not-for-profit sector, the private sector, the public sector, and take a look and see, what are we doing to help women be in leadership positions? It's still not where we want it to be. And I don't think that the discussions are happening at the level that they should be happening.
I mean, I think I saw you mention it, that your mother encouraged you, and I guess your sister, to just go out and do, and that knowing that you can do it as well as anybody. Is that sort of, do I get that right? Is that?
Yes. I mean, I think that, when I look at my mother, she was instrumental in telling me that the one most important thing that I think I learned was educate myself, make sure I get a good education, make sure that, I look for opportunities and work with people. But I think, we have to, as an organization, as a community, think about what does that look like? And it's really about having the mandate of women in leadership, immigrants in leadership at the executive table, put it on the agenda, have those conversations. And one of the other things that we've done and we know about is sponsorship. Nobody really talks about sponsorship, but sponsorship means finding those people that are in your circle that you can elevate into leadership positions. If we don't have a concerted effort to do that, this will not just happen organically.
Yeah, so there's structural impediments, I guess, for this to happen, and we need to actively overcome those. And like you said, but also the personal engagement of women who are already in leadership, or anybody who's in leadership, and find in their circle women that clearly deserve to be in leadership roles, and help promote them. let me move on. We already mentioned them, to immigrants. You yourself have been an immigrant. Your family was, kicked out, expelled by Idi Amin from Uganda, and spent a year in Austria in a refugee camp before being, admitted into Canada. And really, your family had to build everything, from scratch again. And if you look at the pandemic, the numbers are actually quite staggering in terms of how immigrant communities, racialized communities have been impacted by the pandemic, both in terms of, infections, but also in terms of the, death and everything. So this is actually, it shouldn't happen, but why is it happening, and what can we do about it? Immigrants and racialized communities are again at the, in that position.
Well, we know that socioeconomic status does impact health outcomes, and so we take a look at what do immigrants want to do. The first most important thing that they want to do is put food on the table and a roof over their heads. A lot of immigrants that come to Canada, my personal experience is when my parents came to Canada, the first thing they decided to do was, how do we get jobs and how do we make sure that our kids have food, that we have shelter over our heads. We have to remember that we have to have living wage in Canada. We have to be able to allow people to have a living wage so that they can actually do that. And one of the other things that's really very important, and I think this is where universities, colleges, education system has played a huge role, is let's educate our community. And if immigrants don't get an opportunity to educate themselves and lift themselves out of poverty, this is not going to be possible. We have to allow opportunity. We have to allow access to education, all types of education. We can't have, money be a barrier to getting a good education in Canada. That has to be really important. And the other piece of this that I've recognized for a long time is credentials. A lot of immigrants coming to Canada don't get their credentials recognized in Canada. I think we are probably doing a better job, but still not a great job. And if they need retraining, let's put some dollars into retraining. Let's put some dollars into recognizing their credentials. But one of the things that I would say is that immigrants are, those immigrants are trying to now just survive. It's being impacted by COVID severely. And we really need to look at those sectors and say, what can we do better as a community?
And I'm happy you call on us as the education sector as well. And I think we are having discussions, at our university, and I think with other universities and other universities having the discussion as well to create more of a balance, to create more opportunities for racialized communities, indigenous communities, and so on. It's not going to be easy because it's been ignored for too long. The worry I have, it's because now it's Black Lives Matter and so on, and the pandemic, and everybody says, oh, it's terrible, that this fizzles out, that it's tokenistic, that will create a scholarship here and there and help and have lots of meetings, and then eventually, not much will happen because structures are in place, and we talked about it. And you probably experienced that as an immigrant, as a woman, that there's a lot of talk, and when it comes to actually doing things, there's much less of that. Is there anything that you think we can do to make sure this time is different?
It's very interesting you say that. So I think many of your audiences, many people who are immigrants or women will have experienced being a checkbox. I know I have. I've been a checkbox that, many times in my career, in my journey, I get asked to interview for a particular position, and I know that I'm the diversity checkbox, and I think many, many people know that they're being asked, and at some point you just say, well, no more. But, I think this is the problem. The problem is that diverse populations, immigrants, we talk about Black, Indigenous, people of color, we are sometimes asked to participate from a token perspective. We actually really, to get the diverse perspectives, all of Canada is so diverse, and those diverse perspectives are so important when you're doing any kind of work, and bringing in those voices are so important. These have to be top of mind. They have to be on the agenda. And I'm at the point where I'm actually thinking, Matthias, that maybe there's time for things to be mandated, for there to be quotas, because, we've looked at how many, when we started talking to the government and others and private sector organizations about women in leadership and number of women on boards, we got feedback that yes, 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 we'll go there. But again, we went into this, tokenistic pieces where everybody said yes, they would do it. And there has been some movement. We have seen some women, be appointed to boards and leadership positions, but we are far, far away from it. And I think that there needs to be time where we start having a real discussion and start mandating it, putting it on every executive agenda, and having more conversations about what does it mean to have quotas.
Yeah, that was my next question. So you preempted it in a way, because in Europe they've been trying with quotas because progress wasn't being made, and both in in the political sphere, quotas of women in parliament, regional parliaments, and so on, and quotas on boards. I mean, again, and that some progress has been made, but yeah, maybe that's the answer here too. I think something has to be done. Like you said, it's very difficult to to imagine that this will really my experience, I'm a historian, things, there's these waves and we say, oh, we should do this, and then very little happens. But maybe quotas is the way. What about sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's very interesting. There's been a lot of dichotomy in terms of quotas, whether should we do quotas, not do quotas. There's a lot of pros and cons for each, but at some point you have to say what is going to make a difference. And we haven't seen a big difference. We may have seen a little bit in the movement of women being in leadership roles and on boards, but when it comes to immigrant women, when it comes to people of color, it hasn't had much impact yet.
No, and I actually looked at, in preparing for this, I looked at how many sort of the big Canadian firms have, women CEOs, Indigenous CEOs, people of color as a CEO, or even on their board, and that number is shockingly low. So, and like you said, you find women more in some charitable organizations and so on, but I don't know.
Well, remember that the charitable organizations is predominant, like the not-for-profit sector is predominantly women. And you take a look at, even in the charitable sector, I love the charitable sector, and I'm so happy that I'm in an area where I can give back to my community. But you will not see very many people of color in leadership positions in even the not-for-profit sector.
And like you said, diversity it's not about just ticking a box. It's really about getting diverse views heard, on those boards, and for the organization also then to reach out to diverse communities. It's out of self-interest. Companies should do this. Do you agree with that, or?
100% agree with that. This is where I said a little bit earlier, is that it's I find it very interesting. I've had a lot of conversations about this where some people say, well, the same type of person on a board can bring diverse perspectives because of their education or what it may be. But if you don't have people of color, Indigenous people, people that gender different, if you have a board that's full of men, you're not going to get the experiences and diverse perspectives that you would get from putting more women or more people of color on the board. And I think that there has to be some thinking about, we serve a community that's different. That is, we have people of color, we have Indigenous people in our community, we serve those communities, that we should have those voices at the table.
Yeah. Absolutely, totally agree. I'm still waiting for some questions from our audience. It's been a bit quiet, so please feel encouraged to share your thoughts and questions with Mina. What about you? I mean, you've been through the private. You started in the private sector, have gone to the public sector, and now are for the last few leadership appointments been in the social sector. Would you go back? Would you go sort of take the return trip, go back into private sector?
I would say that one of the things that people don't understand is that the skills are so transferable from public sector to private sector to the not-for-profit sector. I think that there's a misunderstanding out there that there are different sectors that need different skill sets. Skill sets can go across the gamut of the sectors. And absolutely, if I think about what I've done in my career and what I love to do, it's service. And when you think about service, whether you're in a not-for-profit sector, the public sector, or the private sector, you're serving a community. And when you think about what that looks like, it really is around working in any sector, that's what you do. And I, of course, I would consider any sector because I've been in all three.
And like you said, you think those skills are transferable. What do you think is sort of, if you had to pick a list of the top 3 leadership skills that you learned, that you apply? This is about leadership lessons. So give us. You're going to teach a whole lecture about that in January, but give us the 2-minute Mina Mawani. The 3 most important leadership lessons. You had a really distinguished career and you've seen all 3 sectors. Sort of, what's your, for the audience, what's your what should they take away?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, and I have, 2 of my children, and I always talk to them about leadership and what it means. And the first thing I will say to you is empathy. Have empathy for the people you work for, the people you work with, the people that are with you. And I think empathy is so important. We forget that no matter what leadership sector you're in, empathy is incredibly important. You have to make sure that you're giving back to your community in whatever sector you are. That includes, customer service, when we think about private sector. And then I also think about working hard. I think many people forget that leadership is not just about, you're extremely intelligent. Leadership is working hard. It's hard work that you roll up your sleeves, you serve. And I keep telling my children the same thing, that it's not just about doing one thing, it's about really working hard and show that you care about people. And finally, it's really about, just being able to work with others, collaboration. Collaboration is huge when you think about all sectors. If you can't collaborate, you have to collaborate not only in your own sector, but across sectors is very, very important in leadership.
Has any of that changed, those 3, or become more important during the pandemic, because of the pandemic?
100%. I would say empathy during the pandemic is so incredibly important. I know that everybody's working hard, Matthias. I think all of us, even though we're Zooming now and not traveling to our offices, people are working above and beyond capacity. But again, empathy is so important to understand what people are going through. As you can see, as you've talked about women and immigrants and the general population, many people are suffering from mental health issues, from being isolated in their homes. We have to have empathy for who we serve. And at the end of the day, if we don't collaborate, we have to collaborate with government. I'm collaborating with the university sector. There's so many different areas that we have to collaborate across. And during the pandemic, this is it has become more and more significant.
Thank you, Mina. These have been really, really, I have to maybe guest audit your course. This has been incredible, and getting to know you. So thank you for this. And I think our audience will take away a lot of leadership lessons from this conversation. And I hope also, some call to action. We talked about diversity and inclusion. And as normal, we will tape this and post it. And thank you again for being here, Mina. And I'll pass now on to Robert Lynn to announce the next talk. Thank you.
If I can just say thank you for having me on this panel. And also, if there are anyone watching that needs help with their Crohn's or colitis or IBD, you can reach us at crohnsandcolitis.ca. And there's a number of support programs and initiatives that will help you with looking after yourselves during this pandemic.
Thank you, Mina. Robert.
Thank you, Matthias. Thank you, Mina. Please feel free to join us at our next Fireside Chat, Leadership Lessons, Building a Winning Customer Service Experience for Crisis and Beyond. That's on Thursday, October 29th at 1 p.m. with David Kincaid, founder and managing partner of Level 5 Strategy. Special thanks to Mina for being here today. Have a great day, everyone.